In this video, I'm going to give you an overview of viruses, a very brief overview, and then I'm going to spend most of the time talking about SARS-CoV-2, which is the virus that is responsible for the COVID-19 pandemic. So, viruses are classified by biologists as non-living. So, what are the criteria that biologists use to define something as living? Well, I'm going to list them. So, for organisms that have some sort of order in their structure, those who can respond to stimuli from the environment. If you were to touch this plant, it's going to shrivel up itself. So usually living things can respond to stimuli in the environment. Living things can reproduce. They can regulate to maintain a stable internal environment. They are capable of evolutionary adaptation. They can acquire and process energy from the environment, and then they're able to undergo growth and development. So the reasons that viruses are not classified as living, it's because they can't do either at least one of these. So one of the most important ones is that they cannot do energy processing and metabolism on their own. They need a host to be able to do this. Otherwise, they have order, and then they can reproduce, even though they need a host, but they can reproduce. And they are capable of evolutionary adaptation, and they can kind of start from simpler structures inside the cell and then build up to make the final virus. But the reason that they're not considered as living is because there's at least one of these things that they cannot do on their own. They need a host. So viruses have different morphologies. They come in basically in a broad category of three different structures. They can be either helical. They can have a really complex isohedral structure. This outside is all made of protein. Or they could be complex. And the complex ones actually have a plasma membrane that is enveloping them, enveloping the genetic material. And usually this plasma membrane is derived from the host that the virus infected and used to make more virus. So in the helical ones, an example of it is tobacco mosaic virus. It's a virus that infects plants. The genetic material is inside this, what's called capsid, which is a complex protein structure. The same thing with isohedral ones. Human rhinovirus, that's the structure of a virus that is an isohedral one, so that outside is protein, inside the genetic material. And then smallpox, the virus that causes smallpox, is a complex. And also the coronavirus that we're dealing with right now is also a complex virus. It has an outside plasma membrane. That's why an effective way, probably most effective way to prevent catching this virus is washing your hands and anything that has the virus with soap, because soap dissolves the plasma membrane. So classification of viruses is based on the type of genome that they have and how the genome is processed inside the cell. This is called the Baltimore classification. It's the most modern way of classifying viruses. They're classified into 7 groups. So some viruses, their genome is double-stranded DNA. Some have single-stranded DNA. Some have double-stranded RNA. Some of them have single-stranded RNA, which is positive sense, and that means that the RNA can directly be used to make protein, and the COVID-19 virus is a single-stranded RNA that has a positive sense. We have single-stranded RNA viruses that are negative strand. An example of that is the flu virus. So their RNA that exists in the virus that is injected into the cell actually can't be used to make protein. So the messenger RNA, positive strand messenger RNA, has to be transcribed from the RNA genome. Then you have ones that have single-stranded RNA, but they have an enzyme called reverse transcriptase, which makes DNA from the genome of the RNA, and that DNA gets incorporated into the genome of the host. And then we have double-stranded DNA viruses, which also have reverse transcriptase, and then the viral genome is replicated through an RNA intermediate. So the RNA may serve directly as messenger RNA, as a template to make messenger RNA. So the different types of genome that they have and the way that genome is used in the cells to make more RNA. So the virus that is causing COVID-19, which is a class of coronaviruses, are called positive strand RNAs. The common cold virus is also a positive strand RNA. The flu virus is negative strand. So one of the things that is often one of the questions that comes up is, well, can't we treat the coronavirus that we're dealing with the same methods that we're treating flu virus? Well, no, because they're totally different viruses. So let's take a look at the life cycle of these two viruses. So the life cycle of the flu virus has different stages. So here's the virus. It recognizes the cell through binding to receptors on the surface of the cell, and it attaches to the cell. Then it enters the cell, and then the cell engulfs the virus. Then it the virus kind of breaks apart, and then the RNA of the virus, remember it's a negative sense RNA, so the cell can't use it to make protein, so it enters the nucleus, and in the nucleus a positive sense RNA is made, and then that RNA goes back into the cytoplasm to make viral proteins. And then the viral proteins that are made then also is used to make the negative strand RNA. So then once everything is ready, then they are packaged. So we get attachment, entry, replication, assembly, and egress. That means the virus is shed out. Now, what does the coronaviruses look like? Well, here's a summary. This is a coronavirus. The structures that are protruding out of the virus, this is called the S protein. They bind to specific receptors on the human cells. So these receptors are all over the place in our body. So upon binding, the virus can enter the cell, and then it can spit its RNA inside the cell, and since it's a positive strand, it is immediately used by ribosome inside the cell to make a virus polymerase. And the virus polymerase uses the positive strand to make a negative strand RNA, and then that negative strand RNA again is used to make positive strand RNAs again, which are used to make a bunch of different things. First of all, this cell uses the positive strand RNA to make what's called the N protein. The N protein binds to the viral RNA that was just made. And then there's also other proteins that are made in here, which is one of them is the M protein, which is component of the plasma membrane, final plasma membrane of the virus. Now, since all of these proteins are going to be shed out through the secretion system of the cell, they all end up going into the endoplasmic reticulum, then into the Golgi apparatus. Obviously, also the receptor, this protein that is projecting out of the virus called the S protein is made. And also there is this little protein outside of the coronavirus which identifies certain carbohydrates on the surface of human cells. That's also made. So everything is made within the endoplasmic reticulum and then into the Golgi, and then a Golgi vesicle is made, which is going to fuse with the plasma membrane and spit the virus out. So as you can see, its life cycle and its shape, its components, the way the virus is made is quite different from the flu virus. So here's a more detailed picture of the coronavirus coat. This is a very, very important part of the virus. It's, as you can see here, it's 3 separate parts. It has 3 separate subunits, and this is what makes these spikes in here. Now, whether or not a coronavirus can infect a human being depends on how well of a fit this S protein makes with the receptors that are sitting on our plasma membrane. And the current coronavirus, the S protein for this current coronavirus is a really nice fit with the receptors that is present on our cells. So this is the plasma membrane envelope of the cell. That's the protein that I mentioned that binds to carbohydrates on the surface of the cells, and then that's the RNA bound to the N protein. So what are coronaviruses and where do they come from? And how do they transfer into us? So coronaviruses are a diverse and huge class of viruses. And one group that affects us are called the beta coronaviruses, which are shown in here. This image is showing you the mild infections, viruses that give you a mild infection or severe infection. And then this arrow shows spillover from one organism to the next. So you can see at the top in here, these are provide mild infection in human beings. These are all common cold viruses. So if you ever catch a cold, every year you have caught a coronavirus. So the coronaviruses have natural hosts, meaning they exist naturally in certain organisms. Most of the hosts for coronaviruses, for most cases, are bats, but there are also coronaviruses that live in mice or in rodents. That's where the original, based on sequencing, that's where coronaviruses have been found. And then scientists have also found coronaviruses that are in cows, I think this is an emu, in what are called civets, there's kind of a cats, camels, and pigs. And based on sequence similarity, for some of these coronaviruses, we're pretty certain of the way it's transferred to us. So, for example, for a couple of cold viruses, according to sequence analysis, scientists are pretty confident that the original coronavirus lived in bats, and then it went into these, I think, emus. I don't know what you call this organism, and then it was transferred to human beings. Some in this case, the coronavirus lived in rodents, and then it was transferred to cows, and then it was transferred to us. For the final group of common cold viruses, it is thought that it was present in rodents, but they have not been able to find the organism that was the intermediary that then transferred to us. So what does that mean? That means usually the coronavirus that is found in us, for example, let's say HCOV-OC43, has some very close similarity, sequence similarity with the one in the cow. And the one in the cow has very close sequence similarities with the one that is in the rodent. And as you go towards the human subject, the sequence similarity between the rodent and the human decreases. So that is how scientists determine the path that the virus takes. So now let's focus on the more deadlier ones. These are SARS-CoV and MERS-CoV. SARS was responsible for the pandemic of 2002 to 2003, which killed a lot of people, and scientists are pretty confident that this virus lived in bats that gave it to this wild cats, and these wild cats somehow were domesticated. But some of these wild cats were sold in live animal markets, and that's how it made it to human beings. Then MERS-CoV, was primarily found in Middle Eastern countries. So if you've never heard of it, that's because it never made it to our shores. And scientists are pretty confident based on sequence analysis that it originated in bats, then it was transferred to camels, and then from camels it was transferred to human beings. And as you know, in some parts of the Middle East, camels are a very common mode of transportation. Then we have SARS-CoV, which in 2016 to 2017 in the Guangdong province of China, it killed more than 90% of piglets 5 days or younger. And again, it was quite devastating for the farming industry. So that's basically an overall of what is known about coronaviruses that infect human beings. And what this chart doesn't show is SARS-CoV-2, which is the one that is causing the pandemic now. And that's because it's a new virus. This paper was published in March of 2019. And by the time it was published, we had not known about the COVID-19, the virus that is responsible for COVID-19. So what do we know now about the SARS-CoV-2 as compared to other coronaviruses? So I tried to summarize it in here. Common cold viruses, usually their site of infection is nose and throat. They usually stay on the top in your nose and throat, and they cause congestion, local inflammation, so the symptoms are pretty mild. SARS-CoV-1, which was responsible for the SARS outbreak, and MERS-CoV, which was responsible for the outbreak in the Middle East, their primary site of infection is the lungs. It's the lower respiratory tract, and they cause your body to strongly react with producing what's called cytokines. Cytokines are molecules that really kickstart and causes your immune system to overreact, and it causes damage to lung cells. So SARS-CoV-1 and MERS-CoV aren't as contagious as the one we're dealing right now. And the reason is that it doesn't infect the upper respiratory tract. It is when you get an infection in your upper respiratory tract, and then your saliva, you sneeze and your saliva comes out. That's how you can spread it. So that's what makes the current virus that we're dealing with much more contagious, because it can not only infect the cells in the lungs, it can also infect your nose and throat. And that's why some people actually experience losing taste. And that's why this current virus is so much more contagious than the one that we had before. Now, in addition to nose, throat, and lungs, this virus can also infect heart, intestine, and eyes. And I mentioned that spike protein on the surface of coronaviruses, the spike protein, that S protein on the surface of SARS-CoV-2, sticks much more strongly to cell receptors as compared to SARS-CoV-1 and MERS-CoV. So it's not only more contagious than the previous coronaviruses that we've known, but it's also more deadly because it can, again, cause cytokine storm, it can damage the lung cells, but because it also can infect intestine and heart cells, it can cause additional problems. So it's a really deadly virus, and it's pretty new, and where scientists are still learning about it. So there's still much we don't know about SARS-CoV-2, and that makes it difficult to really extrapolate from previous viruses to this one. So here's some of the question. Is it going to disappear like SARS-CoV-1 and MERS-CoV? We really don't know because we've never seen this virus before, and this is something that people are having a hard time with. They always want really clear and yes or no and black and white answers from scientists, but scientists can really give you answers based on what they know, and there's just not enough we know about this virus. Can we eradicate it with a vaccine like we did with polio? We really don't know, and I think it would be a grave mistake comparing and expecting the same thing from vaccines that we've seen before, because they're just not comparable. It's not the same virus. It's just not comparable. Was it manufactured in a lab? Well, current data, people who do this for a living, who trace viruses through evolutionary analysis, when they look at the current data that we have about sequences of SARS-CoV-2 and other coronaviruses, the data doesn't support the idea that this lab was specifically manufactured in a lab to destroy the world. Will we be ready to fully open up in the fall? Again, we don't know. We need testing. And unless we have tests that really work and it's widespread, unless we contact tracing, we really don't know. We have to go based on data. And there's a lot of discussions about privacy issues or whatever with respect to contact tracing. Will there be another new coronavirus outbreak like this? You can be sure that it is very likely, because these viruses are in nature and they are recombining and gaining mutations all the time. And the more we interact with nature, the more we work with wild animals, if we do wild animal hunting or go to markets with wild animals, this is going to happen. Okay, so where are coronaviruses in the world? And this is about the data, this summarizes data about what we know from SARS-CoV, the virus that caused SARS. But this basically, studying SARS-CoV and MERS-CoV allows scientists to really understand how coronaviruses function. So it is known SARS-related coronaviruses, so viruses that are coronaviruses and are very closely related to the one that caused the pandemic in sequence. They're found in wild animals in Europe, Africa, China, and Southeast Asia. Now there are places in the world, like there is a particular cave in the Yunnan province in China where there's a lot of bats, and there is a whole variety of different coronaviruses that live in these bats in this province. And that is a great cooking pot for producing new coronaviruses, because the way coronaviruses change is by one of the major ways that they change is by doing recombination, by exchanging pieces with other viruses. They do mutate, but not as often as flu viruses, because coronaviruses has a way of correcting mutations. But what they do really well is exchange pieces with other coronaviruses, and just they make new flavors of coronaviruses. And if you can imagine, if you keep making new flavors of coronaviruses and humans come in contact with them, then natural selection will select the ones that can use humans as a host. This is why it is extremely important that we fund the scientists who are actively going into the different parts of the world and studying coronaviruses and other types of viruses in the world. If we do not do this research, we will not be prepared for future pandemics. We will not be able to predict what kind of viruses are going to come out of nature. So supporting scientific research in studying viruses in the world is really important, especially viruses that transfer from animals to human beings. These are called zoonotic viruses. So I wanted to spend some time to maybe correct some disinformation that is out there, and there is a lot of them, and it's easy to get confused. Some of these posters that I'm showing you are directly from the World Health Organization. So one question has been, do vaccines against pneumonia protect you against the new coronavirus? No, the answer is no, because pneumonia is caused by a bacteria, and that the vaccines against pneumonia is not going to protect you against this virus. Does the new coronavirus affect older people, or are young people also susceptible? Everybody gets infected. It doesn't matter if you're old or young. The reason older people may be more susceptible to dying from coronavirus is because they have underlying conditions. They have asthma, diabetes, other conditions. But everyone gets infected with coronavirus. And actually, the latest news is that emergency physician doctors are seeing some very strange immune and reactions into kids that have been infected with the coronavirus, which is, again, a result of this virus being so new. We just don't know enough about it. So you don't only need to protect old people from this. Everybody needs to be protected. Can the coronavirus be transmitted in areas with hot and humid climates? Yes, it's not only in the cold climates. Would exposing yourself to sun or high temperatures prevent COVID-19? No, it does not. Does 5G mobile networks spread COVID-19? That's another disinformation that is out there. Why? How do we know? Because there are places in the world where there is no 5G and coronavirus is still spreading nicely. So if 5G was doing something, then those places that don't have 5G should not have any problems with coronavirus. Would you, by either consuming or spraying yourself with bleach or putting it in your veins or disinfectants, will protect you from COVID-19? Well, it may, but it also will kill you. So don't use disinfectants on your body or in your body. Would adding pepper to your soup or other material prevent, cure COVID-19? There is absolutely no evidence to support this. Are there currently drugs that are licensed for treatment or prevention of COVID-19? There are a bunch of trials that are going on, but there is really no known drug for which there is solid evidence for prevention or treatment of the virus. There's a lot of talk about hydroxychloroquine, but the data that is coming out is not really encouraging. Does giving someone with injecting them with high amounts of vitamin C and D, will it cure coronavirus? No, it doesn't. Vitamin C and D are not, and there is a claim here that vitamin C and D are now used as a conventional treatment of coronavirus. That's a false statement. There is only one hospital, which I believe it's in Washington, D.C., and one doctor, they are trying vitamin C, injections of vitamin C to see if it makes a difference. But it is not, vitamin C and D is not a conventional treatment for coronavirus. There is a study in China that started that is testing vitamin C and D injections, but the data is not out yet. So if anybody is telling you that vitamin C and D are part of the conventional treatment of coronavirus, they're not being honest. There are many vaccines. So as I just finished telling you that coronavirus is an RNA virus, and there are many vaccines that work against the RNA viruses. They're on the market. Influenza, measles, mumps, rubella, rabies, yellow fever, and Ebola. So if you ever hear in a documentary or something, or somebody on Facebook saying there's no vaccine currently on the schedule for any RNA virus that works, that is a false statement. And stay away from people who tells you these false information. Another thing that I've heard is that people say, well, there are millions of people that die of cancer, but there are not that many that are dead because of COVID-19. Why are we making such a fuss about it? There are not that many people dead. Well, this is a false equivalent argument. It's like comparing apples and oranges. It is true that many people die of cancer every year, but cancer is not contagious. You do not get cancer by being in the same room as someone who has cancer. That's the difference. The COVID-19 is contagious and it's deadly. Cancer is deadly, but it's not contagious. That's why we're freaking out about this. Does not say that death by cancer is not significant. It's just they're not comparable. Now, what you want to guard yourself and also your loved ones is against this kind of thinking. So here there's a graph over time which shows the number of new cases of coronavirus. If we don't do any social distancing or any preventive measures, the number of cases skyrockets. But if we do prevention and precaution efforts, which most places are doing, then we can bend the curve. And the curve hopefully is going to level off. Now, when we get close to this section and then the number of cases going down, be cautious about this misrepresentation. See, it wasn't so bad, we overreacted. And the problem with this is that vaccines and prevention measures are kind of the victim of their own success. They are successful when things don't happen. So if we in California, for example, are very cautious about not closing businesses and wearing masks and making masks mandatory. And then over time, we see that really the cases of coronavirus in California isn't really too high. That's because we did something. Things didn't happen because we were careful. So be careful with this argument. This is a false argument. Things didn't happen, things didn't get bad because we did prevention. Now, it's so hard to find credible information about coronavirus, easy to get sucked in by conspiracy theorists and false information. So I wanted to give you some resources that I follow. So these two scientists, one of them is both of them actually are virologists. I've been following the mad virologist for a long time. He shares very useful information, and if you direct message him, he'll actually answer you. He's a very nice guy. Dr. Tara Smith, she is actually, her specialty in zoonotic diseases and viruses that transfer from animals to human beings. So she's an expert in this topic. And since coronaviruses are transferred from animals to human beings, she's the person to go to. Here's a blog, Science-Based Medicine, which it's a system of blog posts that is written by scientists and health professionals. It's a very good way to find credible information, and obviously the World Health Organization, I've provided a link for you here. That's one of the other credible places to get information. Finding rogue YouTube channels and other ridiculous conspiracy sites is not the place to get information. Politicians also don't know what they're talking about. So get the information from the people who know what they're talking about. Dr. Fauci is also a fantastic source of information because he's an infectious disease expert, and he's been honest with us all throughout this pandemic.